Picture a skyscraper in London, a family estate in the French countryside, and a private bank in Switzerland. Now, picture the oil fields of the Niger Delta and the rich mineral veins in Nigeria's north. What's the connection? It's a line drawn not on a map, but in a bank ledger. For a long time, this line has represented a quiet, continuous flow of wealth, moving from beneath Nigerian soil to help build fortunes in Europe and beyond. What if I told you that the independence Nigeria gained in 1960 was mostly political? That economically, the country's vast wealth is still heavily influenced and extracted by some of the same global financial systems that profited from its colonial past. This isn't just a conspiracy theory, it's the often hidden reality of our global financial system. It's a story of how a nation blessed with incredible resource potential, a nation that should be a global economic powerhouse, is held back in a state of managed poverty. This is the story of how powerful global interests have shaped Nigeria's economy from the outside. The world sees Nigeria and is told to see poverty. We're shown images of struggle and corruption and told the country is cursed by its own resources. We hear that over half the population lives in poverty, a tragedy that is framed as an internal failure. That's the official story, a carefully crafted narrative of a nation that just can't get its act together. But that narrative is a lie. It's one of the greatest sleights of hand of our time. The truth is, Nigeria isn't poor. It is obscenely, unimaginably rich. As of early 2025, the nation has proven oil and condensate reserves of over 37 billion barrels. It sits on more than 210 trillion cubic feet of natural gas and holds dozens of different types of commercially viable minerals, including the gold and lithium that will power our future. Its land is so fertile that over 70 million hectares are arable, waiting to feed the continent. So, if the wealth is there, where does it go? Why does the paradox of plenty seem to hit Nigeria harder than anywhere else? The answer is uncomfortable. Nigeria's poverty isn't an accident. It's the product of a system. A system designed centuries ago for one primary purpose: extraction. That system never ended. It just went to business school, put on a suit, and now calls itself international finance. To understand today, you have to look at the past. The story of Nigeria's economic entanglement doesn't begin with the World Bank or a modern hedge fund. It starts with a single British company, one whose legacy survives on the shelf of your local supermarket. In 1879, a man named George Goldie formed the United African Company. His goal was simple: to monopolize the booming trade in palm oil along the Niger River, a resource Britain's factories needed as an industrial lubricant. Goldie was ruthless. By 1886, his company was granted a royal charter and renamed the Royal Niger Company. This charter gave it the powers of a government. It could run territories, raise armies, and, crucially, sign treaties. The company's agents went to local chiefs and kings, promising trade and prosperity. But they often coerced these leaders into signing away their lands and resources. Those who resisted, like King Koko of Nem, who led 1,000 men in an 1895 attack on the company's headquarters, were crushed. The British declared King Koko an outlaw, destroyed his city of brass, and he died in exile. This became the model: use force to secure economic control. The Royal Niger Company was so effective that it laid the groundwork for Nigeria itself. The 1914 amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorates wasn't about national unity, it was a business decision. It streamlined the extraction of resources from the palm oil-rich South and the agricultural North under one controllable colonial entity. And what happened to the Royal Niger Company? Think about that. The very DNA of one of the world's biggest multinational corporations is tied to the colonial enterprise that carved out and sold a nation. Political independence in 1960 turned off the tap of direct colonial rule, but it never dismantled the pipes. The wealth just started flowing through new channels, managed by new gatekeepers who look more like investment bankers than colonial governors. The model of extraction, perfected by the Royal Niger Company, became the blueprint for the modern era. Political independence was supposed to be a new dawn. But for the global financial powers, it was more of a rebranding exercise. The old system of direct rule was messy. A new, more subtle architecture of control was needed, one that kept the wealth flowing without the bad optics of planting flags. This new system has three main pillars: the global banks, international financial institutions, and a complex web of corporate structures. It's colonialism in a suit and tie. First, the banks. Many major European and American banking giants, with roots stretching back to the colonial era, are still central to the system. They provide the huge loans needed for oil and mineral projects in Nigeria. On the surface, it's just an investment. But it can be a gilded trap, with high interest rates and conditions that give lenders significant influence. More than that, these global banks are the primary vehicles for capital flight. Capital flight is the lifeblood of this modern extractive system. When wealth is generated in Nigeria, it rarely stays there. Projections for 2025 show that Nigeria is set to lose around 200 millionaires and their money, with an estimated $1.5 billion expected to leave as high net worth individuals move abroad. This money, whether licit or illicit, is discreetly moved into offshore accounts, London real estate, and Swiss vaults, often with the help of the private wealth management arms of these same banks. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, foreign investors pulled a staggering $420.37 billion out of the Nigerian stock market. The system is designed to hemorrhage wealth, and the banks provide the channels for it to flow out. The second pillar is made up of international financial institutions, mainly the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund (IMF). They present themselves as partners in development, but their help has often come with strings attached. Starting in the 1980s, their structural adjustment program SAPS forced Nigeria to devalue its currency, remove subsidies, and privatize state-owned industries to receive loans. The results were often devastating. These policies were criticized for crippling Nigeria's local industries, which couldn't compete with a flood of cheap foreign imports. Privatization frequently meant selling valuable national assets in sectors like energy and manufacturing at bargain prices to multinational corporations. The legacy of these policies is complex and still debated, but many believe they deepened the country's economic challenges. Even today, the advice can feel like a poison cloaked as prudence. These institutions sometimes advise the Nigerian government to invest its sovereign wealth and pension funds trillions of naira belonging to Nigerian workers in safe overseas markets. The third pillar is the corporate structure. Today's multinational corporations are masters of financial alchemy, operating through a dizzying array of shell companies, holding firms, and tax havens. A company can extract crude oil in Nigeria, sell it at an artificially low price to a subsidiary in a low-tax country, and then sell it again at the full market price to a refinery in Europe. The profits are booked in the tax haven, not in Nigeria, where the value was generated. Nigeria is left with minimal tax revenue and the environmental costs of extraction. This isn't always illegal. It's often how the system is designed to work, ensuring wealth flows in one direction, out. These three pillars: the banks that move the money, the institutions that set the rules, and the corporations that do the extracting, form an iron triangle of economic influence. It's a system far more efficient and subtle than its colonial predecessor. It doesn't need soldiers. It just needs accountants, lawyers, and compliant local elites to keep the pipeline of wealth flowing. This isn't just a theory, it's a real process that happens every day. Let's follow the journey of Nigeria's most valuable resource, its oil. Nigeria sits on a sea of it, yet for decades, it imported almost all of its refined fuel. This absurdity is the clearest evidence of the extractive system. Here's how it works. A multinational oil corporation extracts crude oil from the Niger Delta. The environmental costs oil spills. Gas flaring are borne by local communities. The crude is then loaded onto a massive tanker. But that tanker isn't heading to a refinery in Lagos. It's sailing to Rotterdam, Antwerp, or Marseille. There, the crude is refined into gasoline, diesel, and other valuable products. The huge profits from this value add are captured in Europe. A European corporation then sells a fraction of that refined fuel back to Nigeria at a huge markup. Nigeria, a top global oil producer, pays billions to import the finished product of its own raw material. The wealth doesn't just leak, it's fire-hosed out of the country. Billions of dollars that could have been generated by refining oil at home, creating jobs, and a self-sufficient energy sector flowed instead into the balance sheets of foreign companies. This model was so profitable for European refineries that when Nigeria's own large-scale Dangote refinery began ramping up production, it was seen as a major threat to their business, which relied on a steady trade of exporting fuel to Africa valued at an estimated $17 billion a year. In fact, by mid-2025, European gasoline exports to West Africa had already dropped by a third compared to the previous year, shaking up the market. Now, let's look at agriculture. Nigeria has a staggering amount of arable land, with some estimates putting it over 70 million hectares. It's the world's largest producer of cassava. For decades, this potential was wasted. Nigeria would export raw crops for pennies, only to import processed foods at high prices. But a quiet revolution in the cassava industry is exposing the old system. Nigerian entrepreneurs have started processing cassava into high-quality flour and starch before exporting it. The results are stunning. Farmers who once earned very little are now creating real wealth. The value that was once captured in Europe is now staying in Nigeria. This small victory shows the colossal scale of the value that was lost across the entire agricultural sector for over a century. Imagine the same transformation with cocoa, palm oil, and cotton. Nigeria's economy wouldn't just grow, it would explode. The fact that this is only just beginning to happen is proof of the powerful forces that have worked to keep Nigeria as a supplier of cheap raw materials. Whether it's oil being shipped out raw or cassava finally being processed locally, the story is the same. The moment Nigeria tries to climb the value chain to process its own goods and capture the real profits, it comes into direct conflict with a century-old economic order designed to prevent exactly that. The numbers are huge: billions of barrels of oil, trillions of cubic feet of gas, billions of dollars moved into offshore accounts. But what does this mean for the average person in Kano, Lagos, or a village in Bayelsa? What is the human cost of this grand-scale extraction? The impact is simple and devastating. A nation with the resources of a G20 country is forced to live with the infrastructure of a struggling state. The wealth that should be building world-class hospitals, paving roads, and funding modern universities is instead funding the dividends of foreign shareholders and the lifestyles of a tiny global elite. Think about the absurdity. A country that earned hundreds of billions from oil still suffers from chronic power outages because it can't fund its own energy infrastructure. Much of the population relies on expensive, polluting generators. The money to build power plants was exported along with the crude oil that should have fueled them. Children in many parts of the country go to schools with no roofs or books. Why? Because the tax revenue that should fund education is sitting in a foreign bank or invested in a luxury apartment overseas. Meanwhile, the children of the elite, both foreign and local, attend the most expensive schools in Europe and America, their tuition paid for by the very wealth denied to Nigeria's own kids. Brilliant young graduates face an unemployment crisis, not because they lack skills, but because the industries that should hire them were never built. The processing plants and manufacturing hubs exist in the countries that import Nigeria's raw materials, not in Nigeria itself. This economic drain creates a vicious cycle. The lack of opportunity fuels desperation, which in turn can feed corruption and instability. This instability is then used by the same international bodies and foreign interests as a reason why Nigeria is too risky for domestic investment, advising its government to keep its money safe abroad. It's a masterful, self-perpetuating trap. The World Bank itself has warned that poverty in resource-rich nations like Nigeria will worsen without urgent reforms, yet the reforms they historically pushed often intensified the extraction. Today, a huge portion of Nigeria's population lives in poverty. This is the true cost, measured in lost potential and lives lived in unnecessary hardship. We've traveled from the chartered ships of the Royal Niger Company to the encrypted ledgers of modern global finance. We've seen how a system of direct colonial exploitation evolved into a subtle, yet arguably more effective, system of economic extraction. A system where the wealth of a nation of over 200 million people is systematically drained to enrich outside corporate and financial interests. The official story says Nigeria is poor. The truth is that Nigeria is being plundered. But knowing this isn't about despair, it's about demanding change. Nigeria's greatest resource isn't its oil, gas, or lithium. It's the intellect, resilience, and spirit of its people. Awareness is the first step. For too long, the mechanics of this economic relationship have been hidden in plain sight, buried in complex financial jargon. Change begins when the narrative is reclaimed. When Nigerians and the world stop seeing a poor nation and start seeing a rich nation whose wealth is being captured externally. The solution lies in demanding economic sovereignty. This means pushing for policies that force the processing of resources to happen on Nigerian soil. It means demanding that Nigerian pension and sovereign wealth funds are invested back into Nigeria, building the infrastructure that will power its future. It means supporting the new generation of Nigerian entrepreneurs who are starting to break the chains of the old model. If Nigeria were to reclaim control of its own value chain, it could unlock hundreds of billions of dollars in economic growth. It wouldn't just transform Nigeria, it would upend the old global economic order and signal a new era of African self-determination. The path isn't easy. The forces that benefit from the status quo are powerful and deeply entrenched. But their greatest strength is our ignorance. Their greatest fear is our awareness. So, what can you do? Start by sharing this story. The biggest barrier to African success isn't a lack of capital, but a lack of awareness of the systems that drain it. Join the conversation. Ask the hard questions. Support organizations and businesses that are fighting for economic justice and transparency in Nigeria and across the continent. Be part of the movement that says enough. The age of extraction must end. The dawn of Nigerian prosperity is waiting to be claimed.